So we'll begin with me. I am the host today. My name is Henry Gordon Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Agritecture. And for the last 12 years, Agritecture has been on a mission to accelerate climate resilient agriculture, and we include vertical farming in that. And we've been doing that through blogs. We have a great free blog content that's been running for 12 years this month, which is just crazy. And we run a lot of webinars. I am calling in from Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And again, it's a great pleasure to host this and moderate this webinar. So let's get started. Today's panel is about navigating the challenges of vertical farming. And we have four incredible speakers, and I want to ask them to introduce themselves, where they're from, the company they worked at, how long they worked there, and we'll also get into what they're doing next later on. So Chris, can you introduce yourself and start?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. Thanks, Henry. Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Cerevny. I am the former head of grow science from Fifth Season, which was a large-scale vertical farm where I am currently based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And we closed last year, about a year ago, this week or so. We shuttered. And thank you for that comment about shuttered rather than failed, because I often say that too, is like my background is in academia and research to start out a PhD in horticulture. And that I don't like to say failure. It's just an experiment with an unexpected result that unfortunately it means that some of us had to close operations, but a lot of us are still really jazzed about the industry and excited about the opportunity that's still in front of us. And I think shuttered is a much better way to say that. So thank you for that. As I said, I spent 3 years at Fifth Season troubleshooting the system that I didn't design. I was recruited in by the founders to help troubleshoot and stand up that system, be able to grow crops on it and develop the grow recipes. But I also helped design our next farm that unfortunately we never got to build, but we did design on paper. So I got a lot of experience through that process as well. And then for the last year, I've been a consultant in the vertical farming and CEA industry and worked with a lot of different farms. I've gotten to see inside the economics of a lot of facilities, and now have excited to share some of these insights of farms that are doing it well and farms that have been, maybe made some mistakes or did some experiments with unexpected results.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that intro, and really cool that you're taking all the lessons learned and now learning more, but also distributing that through services. I mean, we're not going to build this industry without failures or struggles, right? So it's important that we learn from them, and part of that is extending that knowledge through some of the services you're providing. Let's go over to you, Ben. Tell us your story.
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm Ben. I'm the former co-founder of Glowfarms, and I'm based in the Netherlands. Glowfarms is also a Netherlands-based company, used to be, and we shut down a year ago as well. We've been running basically a conveyor belt farm, so it's a little different from a lot of other vertical farms. We are growing crops on a conveyor belt. We got to a point where we had a pretty big proof of concept farm, and right when we were ready to scale to a bigger farm, that's basically the point where where everything declined, and we basically shut down eventually. And right now I work in more traditional horticulture, so still CEA, but greenhouses instead of vertical farms. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ben. Can you just explain lightly what you mean by a conveyor belt system? I think some people in the audience might not understand. Sure. How do we even visualize that?
So we've built a system it's basically a huge conveyor belt. It goes 5 meters up and then down again like a roller coaster, I guess. So it's vertical in that sense, but it's a fully automated process basically. So we put in young plants in the beginning and then harvest it at the end. And I still think it's a promising concept, but we didn't manage to continue, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, great. That was helpful. Thank you for that. And let's go over to the Middle East. Kyle, how are you doing?
Hey, good afternoon or good morning to everybody. And Henry and the Agritecture team, thanks for putting this on. This is a great opportunity to get the word out there to the wider audience and to share some of our painful lessons learned on this side so that they're not repeated and the industry can keep moving ahead, as you said. My name is Kyle Wagner. I'm the former head of Madar Farms. We were kind of a hybrid model. We did do some vertical farming indoors, and we also did a very unique interpretation of an indoor greenhouse, effectively blocking out the sunlight and replacing it with LED lights. So we had kind of a hybrid model that we had designed and started to build actually as well. And without going too deep into the painful details, our version of the story is mid-construction. The investors, for reasons that shall remain unnamed, decided to stop being investors, which makes it very difficult to complete a construction project when money is no longer there. There are a number of reasons for that, which we'll get into later on today. But yeah, as you can probably see from the background, I'm still in the industry. I'm actually inside a large greenhouse now in the UAE as well, and look forward to contributing. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. And Ian, over back to the US, which is where I assume you are, from Upward
Yes.
Farms. Do you want to tell us a bit about your experience?
Yeah, I am the former operations manager of Upward Farms, formerly known as Edenworks, as some of you may know it, if you know our history. We were an aquaponic, vertical, organic certified farm producing ready to eat, mostly microgreens for sale in different grocers around the city. I was at the organization for a total of like 5 years, from the very beginning days in a garage and on a rooftop as a greenhouse through and witnessed our kind of evolution towards our final design, which was a vertical aquaponic powered farming system. And we really went all in on the ready to eat aspect of the operation. And the aquaculture was also another kind of distinguisher for us that we leaned into as well. And actually is one of the things that really stuck with me most as something that's very promising and a needed technology to crack in the future if we're going to solve protein problems. And now I am running inspections and compliance for Grow NYC. Grow NYC runs all of the most of the farmers markets in New York City with some wholesale food access programs. And I help and ensure our producers and vendors are satisfying their commitments to regulations and different compliance aspects within our organization. So I've learned a lot from the Upward Farms experience. We went, as I can talk about later, we went all in on kind of achieving different certifications and standards and bending over backwards to do to sell our product, sometimes to our detriment, and kind of contributing to a lack of focus. But that gave me a lot of insight and intel into the dearth of knowledge and expertise in the regulations and compliance area, especially for vertical farming.
Oh, thank you so much, Ian. And, Upward Farms / Edenworks, really exciting project. It was just a block away from our Agritecture's office. So it was really part of our community in New York. I have huge respect for the team, the leadership team, especially their deep commitment to figuring out the biome and the sustainability that's possible in this, right? So they really wanted to create a circular system, and they were relentless in pushing that mission forward, which we can talk about how mission-driven businesses in this sector face certain challenges as they try to deliver on that mission and the reality of simply growing produce and selling it and investor pressure, which is also very important. So we're going to get started with the questions now. If you just arrived or if you were late to join, please put in the comments on the chat who you are and where you're from. It's really helpful for everyone to know that, and use the Q&A feature at any time to get the questions in. We'll prioritize the best questions and the ones that come in first. But first, I get to ask my questions. So it's my turn now, which is very exciting. So, we talked about some different farms here, right? Some that are aquaponic. All of you did vertical farming. Some were more focused on automation. We talked about the carousel. Obviously, Fifth Season was heavily roboticized as a big part of what it was trying to achieve and its founders. But what was really the thing that broke the back of these companies or led them to being shuttered? For example, do you think it was energy consumption, investments, overinvestment in technologies, or some other unforeseen expenditure, meaning a surprise cost, kind of construction, et cetera? Or we could even bring in there the issue of investment bailing. What was the one thing that you would highlight that was the reason, if you could pick one? And again, there's not ever only one, but if you had to pick one, what would it be? Anybody can go first, just maybe wave your hand. Okay, Chris.
Yeah, I got some. I've been thinking about this a lot because there certainly were some unexpected costs. I think everybody, and it's like energy. You mentioned energy right away. Energy. It's not that we didn't expect energy costs. Energy costs are high, and we expect that. It is a large part of the cost of production, and it's high. What was unexpected to me, even as a plant scientist, what I found interesting is just the cost of energy is not always just having the lights on. It's the cost of moisture removal from the indoor growing environment where every drop of water applied to the crop has to be processed through the HVAC. So that means that there is a limit to how much irrigation water you can apply and maintain your energy budget. And so that is a surprise, but that's not the reason. I think if I had to point to one thing why we had to close, I think if I had to pick one thing, I think it would be overextended in all the missions that we were trying to accomplish. And part of it was the investment strategy originally. It's hard now with a 2023 mindset to look back and say like, wow, you had no plan for cash flow. Why would you do that? And I think that like, hold on, back then, this profitability later model was the idea. And we were still trying to corner the market. And this idea that investors were saying, if you could dominate the landscape, first to market will be the ones that will win. And so go get the market. And I think, honestly, when I look back on it, like we had a lot of good bets on what to do. It's just that when it all started pulling back and we needed cash to operate the business, and we were overextended on brand building and trying to secure that footprint of our distribution area, then I think that's what it was. So it was trying to build a brand while we were scaling a farm, while we were ramping up, and all these things. It was too big, too fast, too many things all at once.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think that's a common one we've been hearing a lot, right? Is that the investment trend just changed. Suddenly investors wanted to see profitability, where before it was like R&D and overspending on marketing and breaking into the market. And that shift, whether it was because of interest rates or because of the FOMO and fear that investors started to feel as they saw some companies go out of business, just changed for everyone. It changed across the sector, what felt almost like overnight, and you sort of described that. But Chris, I want to go a little bit deeper because fifth season was super roboticized. And obviously robotics and automation increased the CapEx of the project. Do you think that increased CapEx, you were probably higher than the average CapEx for vertical farming? What percentage of this issue was because of that overspend on automation?
It's hard to say. Overspend on automation is relative. And I think that part of it is, as you go through these models, even if you were somehow donated the CapEx, you still have a challenge of trying to make these models work with the operational expense of these facilities. And then when you're talking about only OpEx, that's where heavy automation helps. But I think the challenge is this, right? In a vertical farm facility, the opportunity to install the automation is when you get the investment to build the farm. And so you think, oh, I've got the money, now I'll go build my project and I'll get it installed. But if you are an inexperienced operator, I think that's where we really run into challenges, because you're taught through these Lean Six Sigma practices and everything that you continuous improvement, you iterate, you try it this way, you analyze it, you make some adjustments, you analyze again. If you now have automation that has fixed the process, it becomes more challenging because you can't necessarily pivot where you could if you didn't have that automation installed. And so when I think about this holistically, I think part of the problem is, while you're still figuring out product market fit, you shouldn't be automating every step in the process, because we still might have to change the way we produce the product according to what we're going to commercialize. And I think that's so, like, getting the sequence down is key here, because it's not a problem with the automation per se. It's that you pick all this automation, plunk it down in the square footage that you have, and then when you want to try to make improvements, I might only be able to run the conveyors this direction, and everything has to go this way. And I only know that after the fact. So how do you phase into it, I think, is the harder question. How do you phase in your automation so that you have the right level at the right time as you scale up? I think that's the challenge.
Very helpful. Thank you for that. I think we're going to get into that a little bit more. But I do want to go over to Ben next, because we talked about energy, right? This question is what broke the back? And Ben, it seems like you had an automated system with this carousel system, but the energy crisis really was in Europe. Chris said, right, our energy was sort of predictable. Maybe there were some things that were unpredictable, but overall we sort of knew what we were going to pay. There were some surprises, but your actual energy rates doubled, right? Is that why Glowfarms shuttered, or is there some other reason that would go ahead of that?
Yeah, so it's a combination of different reasons. but energy was definitely a big part of it, maybe even the biggest. In fact, it was more than a doubling of energy cost. So that was pretty heavy. But one thing I wanted to say is I think we should really look into how greenhouse companies are doing right now. For example, in the Netherlands, but there's successful companies all over the world. And I think as an operational business, like we're trying to produce crops with a very thin margin, so it's difficult already. And then we're adding this marketing expense. We're adding a lot of R&D. It's usually not what a greenhouse company would do. So a greenhouse company right now is all about operational excellence, and that's why they're profitable. They're not doing marketing. They're not, or maybe they've one personal marketing, but not a team of 50 people. So I think that's also a big part of what we might want to change towards the future. Look more towards like operational companies who excel at this business, let's say.
Yeah, super helpful. Thank you for that as well. I mean, more than doubling of energy, I mean, that is hard for any business. But I think your point about greenhouses is a really interesting one that we should explore. And the next question sort of gets into that a little bit more. Let's go over to you, Ian, and then I'm going to go to you next, Kyle. But Ian, what's your story in regards to this? You know, we talked in the intro about the mission, but you know, you get the question. What do you think?
Totally. What Chris was saying about kind of inflexibility of CapEx investments really resonates with me. We developed a really kind of ingenious flow conveyance system that would have worked really well if every single room worked flawlessly all the time. But obviously that doesn't happen. And once we built that headquarters kind of prototype system in Brooklyn, we started designing and building our much larger facility in Pennsylvania before we even got off the ground in Brooklyn. And so as we were designing that Pennsylvania facility, we started learning more and more and more about kind of the flaws or gaps in what we had in Brooklyn. And so the Pennsylvania facility just had ballooning costs as we came back to it, and we had to revise it again and again and again. And we were pushed to move forward on that Pennsylvania facility without learning enough at headquarters by investors. We had to play that catch up all the time. We were never kind of the first mover. We had our own distinguishing features, aquaponics, organic, ready to eat. And those all kind of contributed to ballooning CapEx costs in their own way. But we didn't learn enough, we didn't have enough time to learn about the system we had designed before we were committed to our Pennsylvania place. And so once our Pennsylvania place just kind of became 4 or 5 times the cost of original planning, it was all out the window after that. And that all contributed to kind of a lack of focus. And as all of our engineering teams and architecture teams were focused on this much larger regional farm, obviously headquarters and commissioning of our original kind of prototype system was left behind. So we weren't learning enough. We didn't have enough time to learn. And that all played out in constant revisions to the regional plan again and again.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all your stories, because that is also very, very interesting. You know, I mean, EdenWorks, you know, / Upward Farms was a very thrifty company. Like, I've been in the facility. You guys were figuring it out. You had your hands in there, solving everything. I mean, there was so much work ethic to do that. And then when I saw the announcement of the massive, massive facility we're going to build, I said, well, that is a huge leap. You know, and something we always talk about, at least in agritecture or consulting practice, is this sort of step-by-step development, because even just climate control itself is just not scaled up in the same way that you would think. You know, 100,000 square feet versus 1,000 square feet is so different in its requirements, its needs, and its operational realities, the CapEx, everything. And it's difficult to model that because, let's be honest, the first commercial vertical farm that was announced was in 2011. So, you know, we're looking at not that many years of experience in commercial vertical farming. So a lot of these companies are pioneers. So growing too fast and the pressures of that. But it's interesting you say that it came from the investors. And I think that also highlights some of the problematic aspects of funding for ag tech in general and for vertical farming, where the expectations are kind of unrealistic. And again, I don't want to speak for you, so there's nothing to add to that. But I just want to sort of, analyze that a little bit more. Okay. So he nodded, so we can move on a little bit. But Kyle, you're in the Middle East. Okay. So there's a couple things to keep in mind there, where Madar Farms was as well. Like the investment climate is very different. So can you talk about that? Because in your introduction, you mentioned there's a funding issue. And I think in the US, there was a lot of cheap money for vertical farming 5 years ago, and it was flowing and everybody was getting into it. I mean, I had investors that I was doing due diligence for them, and we told them that they should invest in a different company or a greenhouse, and they still invested just because of the fear of missing out. Like that's how crazy it was, is they wouldn't even listen to the data and they would still make the investments. And then that just turned off and switched. But can you maybe help our audience that's not in the Middle East understand how some of the fundraising is just different in the Middle East?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I'll link that back to the first question as well, because here in the UAE, there are some key differences to other nations in the region, and a number of factors, culturally, financially, investment landscape, et cetera. And here I can say to a large degree, we do follow the West. And our company was initially founded on what's called the Silicon Valley scale-up style, which was, get the cheap access to VC money, deploy very rapidly, acquire the market, as we touched on earlier. However, that kind of met up against more, say, cultural norms here, which is much more about build sustainable business model, reinvest the profits, and grow a family build business over a period of years or decades, achieving a slow and steady pattern versus the kind of explosive, exponential growth we see in the West. So that was one of the key challenges we faced very, very early on, is kind of squaring off these two very, very different mindsets to growth. Yeah? But we kind of try to split it down the middle by saying, listen, let's not just simply demonstrate with a bunch of fancy PowerPoint slides where we're going to end up. Let's actually demonstrate on the ground. So that's what we tried to, build slowly. One of the things I think we did well is taking a page out of your playbook is saying, let's start small. We bought a couple small shipping containers. We repurposed them, we modified them, we tweaked them, we learned, we got market exposure, we got the delivery van, we went through the HACCP, we went through the food safety protocols, we talked to clients, learning those lessons on the ground. That's one of the things I will say proudly, yeah, we got that one right. And that did give us more confidence going back to investors, but still wasn't enough to get the ball in the back of the net over here at least.
Yeah, super interesting. Thanks again for sharing all of that. So I want to kind of ask a quick question, okay? Now that you're done with this experience, if you could go back in time, if you were the CEOs of these companies, some of you in cases were, and your goal was essentially to, I assume, grow food more sustainably, produce more local food, use less pesticides, which are the common goals and probably the goals of many people listening. If you could go back in time, would you do a greenhouse? Would you do a vertical farm? Or would you do an outdoor farm or something else? And I know, Kyle, you had a greenhouse. I get it, but it was like kind of a closed greenhouse. So you get the question, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, great. I think, like a lot of people, I joined my previous company with a lot of heart, right? I wanted to change the world and really make that impact. I think I really was met with a lot of disillusionment with how little that message in my ecosphere, the people we're speaking to right now. I'm not sure we on this call, for example, represent the greater population, i.e. the paying consumer in the market. That was a huge flaw we had. We thought that putting a more sustainable, more water-conscious product on the shelves would just simply fly off and everybody would buy that because, that virtue would trump price. We really got that one wrong, sadly, at the end of the day. What I think I've learned is both on the customer side and on the investor side, sadly, financial ROI and finances, money in the real world, far outweighs impact and sustainability. I think there's a long journey to be there. And I think if we take a bit more patient view, maybe a greenhouse is a stepping stone, similar to hybrid cars is a stepping stone to the full battery electric. So yeah, in hindsight, I think we maybe could have gone a bit more down the traditional road as a stepping stone.
Thank you. Ian, were you next?
Sure. In my current role, I tour lots of greenhouses now, and it is stark what people are able to produce at a fraction of the cost under free sunlight. So right now I'm kind of very much drawn to greenhouses. Obviously the sun is free, but also because a greenhouse gives you a lot of flexibility. You can grow a lot under a greenhouse. You can transition greenhouse between different crops. We were locked in. Going back to the inflexibility point, we were locked into a small range of products. Actually, the aquaculture would have granted us more kind of product lines, different kinds of fish. But we were committed to leafy greens. And when leafy greens may not, when we lost out maybe on market share in leafy greens, that was it. We couldn't grow much else. So the flexibility and the ability to pivot within a greenhouse does appeal to me strongly right now.
Okay, that's very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Chris, over to you.
Yeah, so I didn't really talk much about my background prior to fifth season, but I have experience growing in greenhouses outdoors and in vertical farms and commercially. And I think that to me, it's not really about one versus the other. I mean, it can be if you're talking about making a single investment, but I think there's value to each in its own right. Like, I think there is flexibility. I got excited about all the passionate stuff you were saying about why you might, the ideals behind why you would do this. And I agree with that. I think that is also one of the things that is the biggest caution points I advise companies on when they're thinking about strategy, is getting clear on those. If you have a lot of goals around how you're going to feed the world, let's say, but you have Silicon Valley investors that want a quick return on investment, those don't line up to me. One is where I want to give away as much produce as possible. The other is I want to get as much money for my produce as possible. And how do you do that? Both things simultaneously. That's just one goal, right? And if you go through and think about your strategy, that's I think the key to success versus distraction, is you get diluted by all those things that you're trying to do simultaneously. So that's one argument. The other is like vertical farming. I think it's just a different application for a different product or season. Like, there's greenhouses, but like in Florida, where you've got a lot of threat of hurricanes, other harsh weather environments, indoor warehouse seems to be the way to go, whether that's vertical or it's horizontal indoors, but something more structurally sound. It makes a lot more sense to me in locations where you're trying to filter that sunlight. Like, you mentioned like the Middle East, there's too much sun. And so how do you filter that out? Maybe I don't want a greenhouse. It's just going to cause the greenhouse effect and make it too hot in there to grow leafy greens or whatever my crop is. So it's about applying the right technology for the right thing. I think we've seen with vertical farming that, yes, the cost of production is high, but it has proof of concept. It can still be done. These still can be grown profitably. I think you can still produce greens profitably. I think what you have to be flexible on is the idea that, does it have to be all of these things? When you're trying to compare a greenhouse to a vertical farm, you'd say the cost of production in a greenhouse is so much less. There's no way vertical farming is viable. But the square footage you need, the spread of a greenhouse is way larger than a vertical farm. So if I'm only looking at spread and footprint, I'd say there's no way you can do a greenhouse. It's not viable. So it's the lens that you're looking at it. What technology should I apply for my particular project? And I think there's value to all these. I've seen a lot of vertical farm plans that, had these been out a couple of years ago, they're very investable projects that are going to change this industry for the better. And a couple of years from now, we're going to have an entirely different conversation about vertical farm versus greenhouse. But to me, again, it's applying the right technology to the right sector and the goals of the project that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, super interesting. I mean, the first part of what you said hit me and kind of triggered me a little bit, because I'm in the Middle East and we have clients here, and I'm not just here, but around the world. It's like, I asked them, so what do you want to do? And they say, well, I want to grow the best food that's pesticide free. I want it to be affordable to the whole community. I want our farm to be sustainable. I want it to look really awesome and have robots, and I want it to be profitable. And it's like, okay, but like, can you pick a priority, right? Because then we can start to build around that. And I think that these misaligned objectives are one of the biggest issues in the sector. And we drink our own Kool-Aid as we get excited about this technology. And when it comes to it, it's not sustainable if it's not profitable. And you can layer on other impacts on top of that, or you can design a farm that is low automation, low tech, and produces a lot of jobs and is more affordable, but you're not going to raise Silicon Valley money, and you're maybe going to be a sort of community farm. it doesn't matter what your goal is, as long as you know what your goal is. We can actually design a farm that meets those needs, whether it's a greenhouse, soil-based vertical farm. But setting those goals is so, so critical at the beginning, and leadership continuing that and selling the investors on that is extremely critical. But thanks also for those other comments, Chris, that vertical farming, you know, does have a more proven solution in certain markets, right? Certain places will make more sense for that than greenhouses. Ian, I guess Ben, I want Ben to go next if we can go, because he didn't answer the question about the greenhouses versus vertical, and then I'll go over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Okay.
So I go first?
Yes,
Okay, all right.
please.
So I totally agree with Chris on this. I think the business case should be number one, and then from that business case, we will basically say, okay, it's a greenhouse here, and it's a vertical farm. I don't know, in Siberia, it's probably going to be a vertical farm instead of a greenhouse, right? So I think we can use both, and also I'm a big fan of hybrid systems. So using a vertical farm, for example, for propagation or whatever, and then moving those crops into a greenhouse, I think that's promising too. I guess it works for certain crops, and also for nurseries or breeding companies. And they're already using vertical farms or multi-layer systems without promoting it. You know, it works for them. So I think that makes a lot of sense too. Yeah.
But what would you do if you could go back and do it again?
Probably a greenhouse, or maybe a version of a greenhouse
Or
where
hybrid. Yeah, maybe a
hybrid,
solution.
but it can also be like maximizing yield or maximizing the surface in a greenhouse. I think there's a bit of potential there too.
Yeah. I mean, it's possible that I've visited more vertical farms than anyone in the world. I think I've toured 40 of them. That's only the ones I've actually toured, but I've also just visited some others and not showcased them. But the point I'm making here is the biggest one I've ever seen was in the Netherlands, and it was a tulip vertical farm where they take the tulips to cool them for that stage before they put them in the greenhouse. So, you know, there's a lot of unexpected technology that, as Ben said, is kind of discrete. And that's why sometimes vertical farming is so amusing to the Dutch or anybody who works in traditional agriculture, even because of, you know, the sort of this repeating and rebuilding. Not that it's bad to innovate, but, you know, we have to also look at what's already been done. Ian, what did you want to comment? And then I'll go into the next question.
Yeah, not to diverge from the last question, but something I've noticed when you were listing out what investors or business folk are looking for in a business is, I didn't hear, and this is common, I don't hear this so often, is what the consumer want: taste, and not just the end consumer, but your grocers or your wholesaler, whoever. They're interested in food safety. And I think actually we Upward did a good job with this. We did put both taste and nutritional value at the forefront of our marketing. And for producers, for Whole Foods, we were very forward with the food safety. We are not only an indoor farm, which is one of the biggest benefits, I think, of indoor farming is kind of the biosecurity, and its lettuce is not being grown next to a cow pasture in Salinas Valley. But we were an indoor farm and we were ready to eat. So we had those processing facilities, and that is what grocers were keenly interested in. And we never really met that demand because we overpromised on that. But and in addition to that, have an extremely long shelf life. Grocers also keenly interested in that. So a focus on the end product and what you want and what you can deliver to those consumers is really, really important to be clear with yourself and your customers from early on.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that was one of the questions we were going to look into a little bit. I want to get to it quickly, but you know, now we talked about what we would have done if we could go back. But is the value proposition of the higher quality of vertical farms, meaning the product, its nutrition, is that better than some of the alternatives? Because that is one of the biggest value props, is that it's safer. You know, not to mention that it's local, so its shelf life is going to be longer. You know, how very quickly, like how accurate is that claim when it came to your companies? Do you really believe your product was better nutritionally and better freshness wise, quality, let's say quality a bit broadly, safer, higher nutrition, fresher than what was available in your market? Because that is really one of the questions of is this even worth it? At least one of the questions. So yes, no.
Yes. Yes.
Chris is saying yes. Okay, so this is interesting because we got different markets, right? So Chris is saying yes, East Coast, right, where most of the product comes from Arizona or California. So that's a yes. Ian, what about you? It's kind of like,
Yes. Yeah, I was already getting into it for my previous point. But yeah, 100%. Both on, we grew microgreens. Microgreens are pretty simple to grow. But our microgreens were leagues apart from other producers who weren't growing in an aquaponic biome-rich environment. We would taste side by side microgreens and completely different. So I can't say for certain the nutritional value is better, but taste is often a distinguisher of nutritional value. That often set us apart. And from the food safety aspect, there's no competition from field-grown industrial scale agriculture for semolinas. That's barely even getting into there. That is my biggest takeaway from indoor farming CEA is the biosecurity and food safety. I'm less sure about globalized, but at least for America, the food system is, in terms of food safety, is totally messed up. And that's kind of one of the biggest strengths of indoor ag.
yeah, and microgreens and sprouts can have a lot of contaminant issues, especially, right? So you're targeting something in particular that was making people sick and also had nutritional benefits that they weren't aware of. So that's interesting.
Yeah, sprouts is a really interesting category that's set aside by regulations. They're a potentially hazardous food product, and microgreens don't have a category. So what we often did was default to the sprout category to make sure that we were always above board. However, that got us into some not tricky situations for food safety, but we had to invest a lot of money into making sure our product achieved compliance with another category they weren't really part of.
Kyle, I want to go over to you. The Middle East, UAE imports most of its food, but I kind of saw you shaking your head. The question of quality.
Yeah, so on two different categories. So we were doing both tomatoes and leafy greens, very, very different clearly, right? So if I'm talking about importing tomatoes, and I can say if they're flying in from Western Europe, for example, they're basically gone from the vines to here probably in 24 to 36 hours. So the supply chain is not that long from a time point of view. Is it meaningfully differentiated? How many times do you bite into a tomato and say, wow, this came off the vine a day ago? Not so much. Leafy greens, a bit more time sensitivity there. It's a more delicate product for sure. But I think there's another element to this, which is on top of nutrition, shelf life, ready to eat, et cetera. It's, again, what is that impact? What is environmental impact? And I mean by that is we intentionally grew using the least amount of water possible. That was our number one design ethos. We live in a place where it rains once a year here, right? Therefore, I'm thinking the consumers, the market wants to take that choice. That was what was really missing. And it took 5 years for me to drill this into my head of, what, consumers sadly don't care enough to pay any premium for that.
Did I get everybody? Ben? Yes, we talked about everyone. No, Ben, quality. Can you answer that question? Because you're in the Netherlands. I mean, you couldn't be in a place with more abundance of CEA grown product. So whenever I see a vertical farming go to the Netherlands, I'm like, well, that's interesting.
Well, to be honest, a lot of herbs, for example, come from Africa. So the supply chains are kind of complicated, I would say. And especially the shelf life isn't great. So that was our main USP too. We were focusing on shelf life. And we saw that we did actually make a difference there. Not a huge difference, but still. And I think the rest, like nutritional value, and that's also something consumers don't really care about, because when it comes to herbs, it's mostly flavor and shelf life.
Yeah, thank you for that. Really interesting to hear from these different regions and those challenges. Okay, so I've got one question I'm going to ask, and then we're going to move into these 25 audience questions and see what we can do to get through those. So my question now, we talked about the promise of vertical farming, we talked about investor pressure, we talked about technology, we talked about quality, all these things. But I'm really interested in this greenwashing question, right? Because a lot of these companies really marketed things. I don't want to necessarily name names, but I noticed this really getting aggressive as the investment was rising. There was a clear incentive for both consumers, for targeting consumers and investors to say, I saw things like videos of vertical farms where they're standing in front of and say, this is what sustainable agriculture looks like. Okay, that's a little bit of an exaggeration. Or I saw websites where they said, we reduce our carbon footprint by delivering to the customer, closer, but no mention of where the source of their energy is for all those lights and that climate control. So omission of information is also greenwashing. So do you think that your company that you worked for engaged in greenwashing? And if they did, do you think that had any effect on the final result of the business? And what are your comments on greenwashing in the sector overall?
I'll jump in there.
Thank you, Chris.
So, I think one thing that's interesting is like the whole industry is quoting from the same playbook in terms of how much water we use, how much land we save, and it's all the same 95% statistic that we use. And so, I don't think that's greenwashing per se, but I think that where there is it's relative to sustainability, but sustainability means more than environmental sustainability to me, and it's like there's this balance to it. And what I'm trying to say with that is, look, I think sometimes we took our green claims a little too seriously at the expense of what was best for the crop. And so what I mean with that is, like, if we spent a lot of time focusing on our water quality, just one aspect of growing in our program. We wouldn't have had any of those problems if we were drained to waste. If we were drained to waste, it's mix it once, feed it to the crop, and send it away. But because I'm capturing and recirculating my nutrition, I have to pay attention and do something with it. I have to clean it. I have to add more nutrients. I have to pH adjust, etc. Right? Because I'm trying to save water, I'm making decisions about how do I maximize my water savings when that might not necessarily be needed. And so I think sometimes it's like I have this perspective from the opposite end, where it's like I think that we have taken the green claims too seriously, and it's coming at the expense of what's best for the crop or how to grow optimally in that condition where you have cost pressures and all these other things. We assume if I waste water that I'm wasting money, but water is not the most expensive input. That's not the thing that we necessarily need to focus on right now. We need to focus on other aspects of cost savings, environmental sustainability, etc. And so I think if we can trip over those claims more than I think it was greenwashing. Just my take.
Such an intelligent and unique answer, Chris. I'm really appreciative of that, because again, if you're in the Middle East, water matters. That's a real impact. If you're in the Northeast of the US, it's not as big of an issue, right? So
much
what
water
is the
here.
issue? Yeah, there's too much, right? So what is the issue in your market that you're trying to solve, and match the kind of farm you want to build to solve that problem? Just like at the beginning, we talked about what is your objective, social impact, environmental impact, profitability. What is your top objective, and what is the context? That's why, the future of this, I believe, sorry to get on my pedestal, is hybrid solutions, is more openness to design thinking. Ian, what do you think about this greenwashing?
We were certainly guilty of some of it. I did not feel the impact kind of come down to operations. I did not feel it had an impact so much on operations. I would, maybe the perspective is worth sharing here because we're the one aquaponic representative here. We did make one of our cases was we don't use synthetic nitrogen. Great, super. That does pose some challenges with growing because we're relying on the fish to provide the nitrate, and we're harvesting the fish, and the fish are at different ages. So we always had nitrate, but it was variable amounts. We could work with that. Microgreens don't need a whole lot of nitrogen. They do benefit from it, opposed to what some people may tell you. But our balance of nutrients was hard to maintain, because if nitrogen is changing, you need to balance your other nutrients constantly. And we were adding those. And so that's a very manual, kind of algorithmic heavy process that tripped us up a bit. And the other side of this natural nitrogen is, it may not be synthetic, but where is the fish feed coming from? We are trawling oceans to supply this fish feed. That's sure not synthetic nitrogen, and maybe more sustainable in one sense, but not in another. Aquaculture really needs to figure out the feed kind of solution to really claim sustainability. We did do some trials with nut-based products that was from waste streams from the nut industry, but that didn't really work so well. I'm glad we tried it, but we were reliant on that very extractive industry of ocean farming to feed our recirculating aquaculture system.
Very, very helpful, interesting. Kyle, greenwashing, what's your take?
Yeah, we were very careful from the beginning on that. Actually, in our first year of the business, we actually engaged a Harvard PhD student who happened to be a friend of the family's here, and engaged him for a life cycle analysis. We did a proper scope 2 life cycle analysis, mapped out properly by the book, and it was really, really informative in doing so. We basically compared ourselves and said, right, growing here under LED lights, using locally grid supplied electricity at that current energy mix versus air freight or sea freight importing local produce, how does that stake out? And we actually found ourselves that obviously because of the electricity supply, as you mentioned, Henry, that was the tipping point for us. And we found as long as we can get at least 30% renewables in that particular model, we actually tip the scale in our favor. And in our situation, as we're grid customers, Abu Dhabi, UAE, switching to more renewables, we actually were favorably better off from a carbon point of view than by air freight importing towards the end of the project. But I will actually argue, though, that sustainability is such a complex issue. Packaging design, one thing that we got into that rabbit hole very quickly on, right? We said, let's not do the plastic thing. Let's go down the craft paper because it's consumable. Well, actually, there's not so many forests outside of Abu Dhabi. Where's that wood coming from? Was it farmed sustainably? How did it get here? What's the carbon footprint? And you go down this like spiral of your head explodes at some point. We actually found sourcing virgin, locally produced plastic had a lower carbon footprint because it's actually produced next door than actually bringing wood in from, say, East Asia, for example. So we actually gone back to plastic because also food life has improved, shelf life has improved, food waste has decreased as well. So there is no simple answer on a sustainability question. It takes a lot of math, a lot of scientific approach to come to any conclusion. But the one kind of mistake or learning point I would say on this all is don't let the good be the enemy of the great, right? Trying to push for the ultimate optimized solution sometimes actually takes you in the wrong direction. And I think in hindsight, going back, we probably should have spent less time on that and really focus more on the cost consciousness aspects of running a business, right? Any tech you want to do, anything you want, we are a business, we're an agribusiness. It's not a vertical farm, it's not LED farm. We are putting fresh produce on a consumer's plate. How do we make that happen and make profit? That's really where the focus should have been in hindsight.
I mean, you guys are spot on. That's incredible. I really appreciate that. And, I think, yeah, I mean, all those points are just excellent, but I admire the looking at the data. In our survey and our census, we found 60% of CA operators don't even accurately understand how much water they're using, meaning considering cleaning, et cetera, they're just repeating this 95% less water thing. I mean, that is ridiculous when they're making this claim of saving water and they're not even measuring their water appropriately. So that's how bad it is. So it begins with just actually understanding, not first of all, what you want to do, okay, what the context is, but then actually measuring it, because what gets measured gets done. But excellent points, Kyle. You said it so well. Ben, greenwashing, what's your take?
Yeah, I don't feel like we did greenwashing, to be honest. We did mention some elements, but it wasn't really a USP for us. We saw right away that Dutch consumers don't really care about sustainability in the supermarket. So we said, okay, we're going to focus on a good quality product packaging. So we did do some work in packaging and shelf life, but sustainability wasn't really a USP for us, and so we didn't use it in our favor, I guess. I believe it's like a nice bonus, and if you focus on sustainability, I think life cycle assessments are the way to go.
Yeah, I mean, those are really the gold standard and very difficult to look at because especially some of the gaps in data, and we're going to talk about this in a moment with some of the questions we've gotten about how do you get data to even compare against and some of those issues in the industry. But let's wrap up this greenwashing question. I dropped the link already, but I'll drop it again. Agritecture created free communications guidelines. So whether you're claiming food security or water savings or pesticide free or whatever you're claiming, we actually shared how you could talk about it without being greenwashing, right? So there are ways to promote what you're doing, what you're attempting to do without greenwashing, and that's one of our contributions to the sector. So let's move into the Q&A. We have so many questions. I'm so happy for this engaged audience. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this a bit rapid fire, okay? So one person will answer. If somebody else wants to add to it, they can. So just raise your hand if you're enthusiastic about answering this question. Okay, so this first one is, do you think the overall siloing of information around procedures, technologies, IP, et cetera, delayed the broad acceptance and scalability, I guess profitability of CEA? Were you able to get information? And because you weren't able to get that, did that just delay things for you? Did that make it difficult, or just you were repeating something somebody else learned, or not?
I'm not sure if it refers to the amount of NDAs that we all have to sign in this industry. Now we're not sharing information collaboratively, or if we're talking about internally at companies, how you sector out in a tech company, engineering versus growing versus the finance or something else like that. I think there's a different answer potentially to each of those.
Well, look, so when I started my vertical farming journey in 2010, 2011, there was no data about yields, CapEx, or anything. There literally isn't even data about greenhouse yields. You have to go through research reports, for example. So when you're trying to build a business plan and trying to attempt to make difference in the world, that data just isn't there. And that's something I'm particularly passionate about disrupting, because I think that's why we're repeating the same mistake. So some of it's very simplistic data, and some of it's data that once companies have it, they say, okay, this is under NDA. Yes, of course there's IP, but sometimes it's just, yield data, right? It's not necessarily that big of a deal. Ben, what do you think?
I think the first step is willingness to cooperate and to share this data, to collaborate, and I guess that's also missing in vertical farming. I kind of, that's my feeling at least. So
yeah, I think that's the crux of what that individual was really asking. And we can ask ourselves and maybe get into how we can foster more collaboration, but trust me, I've made multiple attempts, and the sort of investment climate of this sector, the tech investment climate of the sector, as soon as people get investment externally, understandably, they become closed. And that's difficult to have collaboration as the lessons matter the most as you get bigger. Okay, so let's talk about this next question from Alpha. Do you think more individuals with traditional farming experience is required in senior leadership of teams? For example, I often say to
Uh-oh.
It's the punchline.
Lost you, Henry. He's gone.
So I read the question briefly. I believe the question was around, do we need more senior leadership experience from traditional farming in vertical farms?
Sorry, gentlemen, again, but now I'm on the hot spot. So yeah, so there's, I say to investors, if there's not a farmer on the C-suite team, don't invest, right? So I think this question is that, like, do you think we need more individuals with traditional farming experience because they understand plants or they understand the realities of farming, versus sort of us hyping each other up as engineers or whatever we are? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
110%. Both in terms of our original farm models planned for minimal, if any, downtime of equipment. Well, you just need to work on one farm for 1 week to know everything goes wrong. And to be able to pivot and adjust and be creative with your solutions, very important. And I think that obviously comes from can be gained in different industries, but is an integral part of kind of field or traditional or even greenhouse-based agriculture. So yes, in that sense. And on the other sense, I experienced some difficulty with, let's say, labor policies, where our company was very much a work from home kind of thing for engineering and other teams, but our operations team was on site all the time. And farmers are on site all the time, no matter what. And that kind of distinction between on-site, off-site really damaged us. The off-site folks, not through no fault of their own, didn't get the experience and the hands-on experience that they needed to solve these problems that they were working with. And kind of farmers come from hands-on work with directly with employees in the field that kind of I would have benefited from if our company incorporated more of those sort of management principles.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah, really quickly, I think this is a huge problem in traditional greenhouses too. Like they're basically flying in growers from the Netherlands, for example, to the US, because they just don't have the skilled growers there. I think it's going to be a bigger problem in the future. So we better prepare in some way. I don't know how, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that as new entrants, we need to often look to the experience of the past and bring that into these emerging technologies. You want to balance creative, meaning vertical farming, automation, with conservative, real farmers that have real experience. That's where you're going to get the right spot. Chris, did you say what you wanted? You had something to add?
I definitely have a comment on that. Two comments. One, there was this narrative going around for a while that we were going to try to engineer out the grower, that you were going to be able to do this completely automated grower, and you won't need a grower. So we don't need agriculture. We don't need a farmer on the board or anything like that. Well, no, it's really about giving growers superpowers. It's not about replacing the grower. And so that you still need that. I think the other narrative that was damaging was farmers don't know how to make money. They've been doing this for thousands of years, and everybody knows the story of the poor farmer. But I think farmers are actually excellent at making money in a very low margin, high pressure business. And so it's this idea that hubris, I think, gets in the way of learning from farmers that actually know how to make money in this industry. And I think that is so important to have on it. There are so many things that can impact the success of these operations, and I think you need people to do it. I would carry that on beyond farming to, there's enough of us in this industry now, enough veterans, that if you were an investor looking at a project and there is no one with experience on your founding board, you have a big problem. There's enough of us out there now who have experience that are eager to lend it and share it, that also should be a flag, that not just a farmer. Yes, absolutely, yes, have a farmer on the leadership. Second, have veterans from this industry in your leadership team, because there are plenty of us out there too.
I love that. I'm going to add that. I'm going to take that one from you. I'll try to give you credit every time, Chris, but that's a really, really good one. And I write about it in my AgFunder article in December 2021 about the trough disillusionment. Is the benefit of this decline is all of you, is the veterans, because now there's greater opportunities than there ever have been for investors to invest in CEA projects, vertical farming projects, and bring in those veterans and learn from those mistakes. That is how the technology cycle works. That is what we can do if we get it right? If we actually learn the lessons, there's great potential for this in the future, and especially with these individuals today and all of their experience. That's very exciting. Okay, let's move on. What emerging technologies do you believe will still have the most significant impact on vertical farming industry in the coming years? So we talked about all kinds of tech, automation, AI, but what do you think is the most exciting one that could make a difference? Are you all over tech?
I'm biased, but aquaculture.
Aquaculture, okay, aquaponics.
Yeah. If not aquaponics, decouple don't even include the plants, but
yeah,
we need to figure out sustainable protein. And fish are going to be your best bet for that, and we can't keep getting them in the way we're doing it now.
Yeah.
So I'm biased because I have experience with that, but that has to be the technology, and that is a technology that it's advancing very rapidly, and does not get enough attention, at least in the media. There are big investments happening in these larger scale projects.
Make aquaculture sexy again. Let's do it.
Right.
Okay.
Or sexy for the first time.
Chris, you're consulting and you worked for a heavily tech vertical farming company. What do you think?
So I think that technology is absolutely necessary. I think part of what I'm thinking that I'm going to have to, how do I want to say this? I think the biggest innovation is not in the tech. I think the tech is really exciting and interesting, but it's so much of what I think is we get focused on the fringe and not enough of the basics. And I think there's this like 80-20 rule. Like if we're spending all of our time focused on, I don't know, pick one, far red light, that's probably a problem. You have to get 80% of those variables correct before we even need to worry about that. And I think that applies to so much of it. So what I'm most excited about is some of the modeling that's coming out, where we know unit economics are important, but how are all of these things impacting the unit economics of what I'm trying to produce in my given area? Should I even be messing around with trying to eke out a little more yield out of this thing? Because maybe that's not the problem. It's the time, and it's not yield, it's the crop time, or it's something else, right? And so I think that the different ways to look at what's actually going on out there will be helpful. I think the other piece that comes to mind that's really important is this peak shaving. How can you shave during expensive electrical periods through either a localized power grid or some other means to say, like, look, I know if I turn the lights off, my crops are going to stop growing, but how can I strategically do that in a way that helps me save energy costs when it's most expensive? I think that's what I'm most excited about.
Yeah, really, really interesting answers there. I want to talk about Kyle, you got to go. You got to say something?
No, can I just add one more point to that? So it's not really technology so much, but I think we have to make a stronger link between the supplier and the marketplace. So any kind of technology which facilitates better visibility or coordination between the retailers or whatever market you happen to go to minimize actual food waste on site. Food waste grown in vertical farms, it's the most beautiful stuff that goes in a bin. It doesn't help anybody, let's be honest, right? So I think if we can actually cut that waste part out of the equation, that's better profitability for the farmers, far more than any single technology piece of the puzzle, in my opinion.
I mean, so for all of you listening, you just got 4 different business ideas from veterans related to the sector that you could get into or develop yourself, make meaningful impacts that are not just about technology, but about solving real problems. So there you go. What about partnerships? We've seen a couple vertical farms, lots of vertical farms do partnerships with research institutions, et cetera. This could be a way to divert R&D costs. Is it really worth it? Is it more of a headache? Does it make a difference? Do you want more of it? What do you think? No, Kyle's like, meh, we're good.
Get the fundamentals right. I mean,
fundamentals right, yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what Chris said. I think R&D is probably like the last 2%. I think there's the other 98% you have to nail first before you get, my opinion. Yeah.
I suppose if we had actual collaboration and that collaboration was related to research and development, that could be meaningful, right? But individual farms doing the research and not everyone benefiting from it seems a little bit less valuable. And there's some of that happening, but it's not necessarily pushing the needle forward as much as it needs to be. Although I do like some of them, like the Resource Innovation Institute that's benchmarking vertical farms for energy. I think that's an example of some collaboration in a third party. So there is potential to do that. R&D, I wouldn't really necessarily call it that. And then there's some that are just, I don't know, sometimes just look like fake R&D partnerships to sort of create marketing.
There's a different sort of partnership I'm keeping my eye on, and that is between grocers or Amazon and these farms. They are dipping their toes in. I don't know how it's going for them, but from my perspective, grocers are petrified of another romaine E. coli outbreak. They want full control over this process, and they want dependable, safe produce. And they may also provide funding with different motivations than venture capitalists. Grocers don't think they're going to make billions on salad in 5 years, because they won't. They are interested in this industry for a different reason. So I don't know if that's going to work, but I am watching those partnerships very closely.
I'm excited about the opportunities that could come from an R&D partnership that could potentially offset either the cost of operation of your farm or give you potentially early access to a crop that could change the economics of your place. I think that stuff is exciting. I think you have to be very careful of distractions and how that impacts your overall goals. And I think one that those of us that have been around would understand is investor tours coming through the farm and how disruptive they are to the operation of the farm. And they're critical, right? You have to take these people through and you got to show them what the farm looks like, but how it ruins the whole day, right? Because you have to make it look just so and all these things. And it's not that you're trying to mislead investors. You want to make sure that, all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted, right? So it is, but it's disruptive to operations. And that's just a tour. Think about how you would change your operation to entertain a whole new crop, especially if it's in a temporary capacity. That is the problem. It's not the opportunity, it's the risk to executing on what you've already committed to that I think is the challenge.
That's also such an important point to make. And I think also a signal of some of the weirdness of vertical farming itself. Is it a museum? Is it a farm? We don't really know sometimes. So we've got an anonymous attendee asking what we think of 80 acres. I think we're going to skip that one. And another anonymous attendee that's asking how much does it cost to produce each ounce of leafy greens. I think we're going to skip that one too. That seems like someone's fishing. Which high value crops are worth growing in vertical farms today? What would you do if you were to do a vertical farm again? Would you change the crop? Would you grow something different? Ian, you did microgreens. Is there something you wish you had started with? Because obviously you built your farms around what you thought you were going to grow, and then you made some adjustments. But if you could start over, maybe that's the question that Ewing is asking.
I mean, microgreens are easy, and in my perspective, should be a part of any diversified product line. At least they were easy in our system. So I would be growing those again, no problem. For some reason, consumers are obsessed with spinach, baby spinach specifically, and that's a bit difficult in deep water culture or some hydroponic systems, but I want to figure that out. We were doing some research into that. take it completely other way, but I am personally very keen on mushroom growing. That is a high value crop, but the market seems a little saturated in that space at the moment. So I don't know if that answers your question, but kind of provides
that's
some
helpful.
where my mind is at.
Anyone else? Ben, do you think you would have grown something different?
Spinach for sure. So that's in Europe. That's a huge thing right now, and I think it's going to be more and more difficult in the future to grow spinach outdoors. So we've actually had a lot of requests from big companies who wanted us to grow spinach at Glowfarms. That's huge potential, and also I think there are some crops like maybe even peas or pea shoots or whatever with protein. And I think there's potential there too. Probably takes some time to research it and to get it right, but I do see potential in protein rich crops too. Yeah.
Great. Talking about crops and all this, one question that comes up a lot, and also my investor clients ask me, is will indoor farming, vertical farming, ever be able to compete at cost with outdoor farming? Now, obviously, this is a global market. There's a lot of different places where outdoor field comes from, but in your markets, I mean, I guess it's different in UAE. But what do you think? Is it going to be able to compete on cost? Is that even the right question?
It's not the right
How do
question.
how do we define cost? What do we exclude from cost? Is water really meant to be free? Should we keep subsidizing water? I think if we talk about total cost and not accounted for in the traditional way, yeah, absolutely can outcompete field farming.
Yeah, I think the externalities, as David Suzuki and other economists call them, need to be accounted in agriculture before we start to compare these things to each other, and also the subsidies.
Mm-hmm.
Vertical farming isn't subsidized, right? And so a lot of these farms are competing in higher labor costs, markets, and they're trying to make a difference, change the world, but they're not, they might get some economic development incentives in some places, but really it's not subsidized. And I think that's not necessarily a level playing field for innovation.
I'm not sure if this will come out in vertical farming's favor, but what I'm hearing, speaking to more traditional field and greenhouse growers, is the big problem of labor right now in traditional agriculture. And as these larger scale fields need to invest in the high capital investments of automation that vertical farms have always looked at, maybe costs come more to parity. The labor market is messed up right now for agriculture. I don't see a solution coming anytime soon, whether in America or Europe. So again, don't know if vertical farming will come ahead in that, but that's certainly something that vertical farming may be able to contribute to make up for the lack of available labor.
Ben?
Yeah, I just want to add to this. In Europe, it's also pesticides. So the regulations on pesticides are getting stricter and stricter, and I think this will also be helpful, at least for CEA, greenhouses and vertical farms both.
Yeah, those costs, those externalities do start to catch up with certain regulation. Yeah. We're seeing that a lot in Europe, and so the economics will shift. I think that's what we're trying to do here, right? We're trying to create resilient agriculture, and we're trying to figure it out, and we know that there's going to be mistakes made. The key thing is, can we learn from those? Can we share those lessons learned so that, as things start to balance out, this can be, let's say, a meaningful part of a more sustainable food system, not necessarily replacing it, but contributing to it, allowing some aspects of resilience in more extreme areas, giving a chance to grow. Andrew Rose has more questions about beneficial insects. That's not really the focus of the webinar, is like too much on the operations, but does anybody want to share, did they use beneficial insects? Anything about it? Any lessons learned from that briefly?
We use beneficial insects. I think one thing that I would say is that to the consumer, all bugs are bad. It doesn't matter if it's a beneficial or not. If there's a bug in your salad, not good. So I think that's something that has to be taken into account. I think the other is that if you're talking about beneficial insects, in order to maintain that population of beneficial insects, you have to have a population of insects to feed on. So as an insurance policy, it's interesting. Keep in mind you're releasing bugs into a crop that you don't want to have any pests on, whether they're beneficial or not. And I think that's the challenge. But I think as an insurance policy, there are certainly biologicals you can deploy in your operation that will help. Should you ever get an outbreak of the bad guys, it's good to have controls in place.
Yeah, very interesting as well. Okay, I'm going through the questions here. What about, let me see here. Did you guys ever look at mushrooms? We talked a lot about leafy greens. You know, mushrooms, by our analysis, has a lot higher yield, a lot less climate control requirements. Some of the issues might be the market may not pay more for it, so maybe heavier on marketing. But did you guys look at mushrooms in your projects and potential projects?
Yeah, we did as well. Our plan is with a hybrid model, having some small vertical farms co-located there. So it's getting better, generating more revenue per square meter or per square foot. So yes, I think mushrooms can be plugged in. Market acceptance is a key factor there, right? Especially the higher revenue, higher premium mushrooms, they maybe aren't known in the market as well. So the question is, if that market is not already developed, how much upfront cost do you want to put into marketing and, you know, educating consumers? Is the bet worth it? And for us, it wasn't.
Yeah, that's interesting as well. Yeah, in the Middle East, it's really tough to get that marketability as well for that product. Anyone else consider it? I mean, Ian, you were sort of doing circularity. There's play for mushrooms related to aquaponics. So did you guys look at that?
We did not. It did come up. I am experiencing a lot of interest in mushrooms now in my current role. Again, the market does seem a little bit saturated with new growers from my perspective, but mushrooms provide a really appealing value proposition. You can preserve them, you can dry them. Mushroom powders are becoming a thing. So with any excess crop or with any reject crop that isn't perfect, send it to processing. We can't do that with leafy greens. I'm not drying, and maybe I could, but we weren't anywhere near drying and kind of processing microgreens, certainly not. And then the food safety aspect. Mushrooms, because they need to be cooked or processed, don't have as many strict food safety regulations, which lowers your kind of initial investment costs. So for those reasons, yes, I am interested in mushrooms, but we did not, as a company, look into that. No.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You know, we talked about diversification of crops a little bit, and you sort of mentioned the need to process some of these products and the pros and cons of that. Alexander has a question about that. What about the diversification of sources of income? And again, there's multiple ones here he's listed, including food processing, an online marketplace. If we look at projects like Glowfarm, which is a greenhouse, they essentially serve as a community-supported agriculture where they source from other farms, match it with their product. Farm One does tours. You know, obviously, if you're a big commercial VC-funded farm, tours might not work for you. What other additional sources of income did you explore, and would you encourage people to investigate further or just avoid?
I would say avoid. We explored an education model as well, which is great from, again, impact point of view. But when you're a small team trying to figure out how to build the plane as it's flying, in hindsight, it's probably more of a distraction. I think we have to, you have to have that kind of self-control and that discipline to say, what's my core mission right now? How do I achieve success in the short term to now allow me to play the fun games later on?
Any other thoughts on that, Ben?
I agree. I think it's core product first, and then I mean we've also looked into pesto to tea herbs and stuff like that. But I think it's core focus first, and then maybe some extra products. But yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask this one. Oh, Ben, or Chris, did you want to talk about that?
I was going to say that I want to comment on the when you're considering multiple crops or alternatives in your thing. There was the conversation about the mushrooms in the food safety. That also might mean that they need different handling, that they can't go into the same processing room as the lettuce. And those are things to keep in mind when you're exploring additional crops, that if it requires a whole separate processing room, that has to be handled. And I think that's part of it. I think I think mushrooms is really interesting. I think leafy greens, that question earlier about like if you were to do it over again, I'm still a big fan of the salad category for disruption. I think it's the same challenge with mushrooms in salad, is there hasn't been enough disruption, communication to consumers on the benefit of the products that we are selling. And we talked about water savings and energy savings in the sustainable product, but I think most consumers don't understand how delicious a fresh salad tastes because we're so used to the garbage that we get in the grocery store, at least in the US. And so I think there's still an opportunity to show people that, but I think we still have to win that war with lettuce. And I think the mushroom is a bigger challenge, because I also know as a vegetarian, like the value of these high-end mushrooms and how great they are as alternative proteins and umami flavor and all this stuff. It's good. But I'm exploring that and learning that on my own. And it's really hard to catch somebody while they're walking through the grocery store, introduce them to a brand new food. And I think that's the biggest thing, the challenge with these. There's tons of niche opportunities, and I think they're great. I think the challenge is building up the market behind them. So if it's aligned with your mission, it could be perfect. If it's not aligned with your mission, it will be a distraction. And so I think that's it's that hits back on that theme. Is it aligned with what your first goals are? That might be a value-added product, but that value-added product can also be a distraction from the core of growing, if that's the thing you got to get right first. And that's up to each project.
Yeah, and sort of related to that is AJ's question about lobbying and policy. Wish that there were, I guess, more towards Ben for Europe and Chris and Ian for the US, a little different in the UAE, but a need for lobbying in particular to make, for example, subsidies for CA, et cetera. Is that a worthwhile place to put our energy as a community or as individual farms? What do you think, Ben? You're on mute.
Yeah.
Just one second.
Yeah. I think we could do more lobbying for sure, especially compared to traditional agriculture right now, especially in the European Union. I think there's a lot of lobbying going on for traditional agriculture. But I'm sort of pessimistic on this. I don't think it's going to change in the coming years. This really takes like maybe even 10 years or so. And it probably means that when we encounter certain problems in traditional agriculture, that's the point. That's probably the tipping point where we'll start looking into alternatives, and that's also when the lobbying will follow. And I don't think it's I don't think it's going to change in short term. Yeah.
Ian, what about you? I mean, you talked about even aquaculture. We need more in that. You talked about fish. You also talked about what you were going through. I mean, is that something that you think is worthwhile going deeper into and something needed?
I don't know. My role was less focused on that and more in the internal nitty-gritty. I do feel like we were doing a decent job in kind of gaining consumers' attention on our microgreens on the shelf, and to differentiate us from major growers. Major growers from California are not selling a lot of microgreens. So that was our niche category that we saw that we'd be able to kind of take advantage of. Though on the topic, I would like our customer base and our source of research and everything was a New York City consumer. That does not always scale to other regions or areas of the country, let alone the world. Just because New York City consumers are consuming microgreens doesn't mean people in the country will. I see the same thing among our mushroom growers. Mushroom growers cannot sell their kind of exotic mushrooms in the country or like even in smaller cities, but they fly off their tables in New York City. So twofold to answer the question. Is I would prefer to focus on the customer and persuading the customer, and then be wary of who that customer base is in terms of scalability.
Thank you so much to all of you and to our attendees. I'm going to wrap this up now because I think we've gotten through a lot of questions. I want to say the questions that are outstanding, we are recording them and we'll do our best to answer them. I might create a LinkedIn post and allow our panelists as well to contribute so we can have a good discussion and not miss any of this sharing. I really want to thank Ben, Chris, Kyle, and Ian for being so open, for their time, and for really contributing to the growth of this sector in a big way. I want to give you the opportunity to have one last word really quickly. So let's start with you, Kyle. If there's one last thing you want to share, maybe something about where people can find you or what you're doing next or anything you want to share, and we'll go around and do that.
Yeah, great. I'm available on LinkedIn. I'm currently working with Pure Harvest Smart Farms here in the UAE. I'm a big greenhouse player now. Thank you guys so much for your time. I'd love to be a part of the conversation. I'm happy to contribute to this because I believe in what we're doing. Like all of us are here today because we believed in something bigger than us. We have a long, long way to go on this journey. It's going to take perseverance and patience. So please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you for that, Kyle. Really appreciate it. Ben, what about you?
Yes, so you can add me on LinkedIn as well. I really think it's important to keep this discussion alive and to talk about, well, not failures, but talk about the lessons that we've learned. And I really hope that someday food production will be truly sustainable. So yeah,
that's the goal.
Thanks to all. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Ben. Thanks for your openness and sharing. Chris.
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Chris Cerevny, and I'm also my company is called bridgecityglobal.com or Bridge City Global, and you can find me at bridgecityglobal.com. That's the name of my consulting company. If you are a farm out there or you're thinking about getting started and you're listening to all this and you need some help, reach out to, I would love to help you, whether you're talking to me or any of the other panelists. I think there's a lot of us in this industry that want to help. Even if we just hop on a call for an hour and chat about your project, I'd love to help you strategize the best way forward. Also, if you're an investor listening to this conversation there and you've heard some of the stories about farms closing and the failures of the industry, please understand that a lot of that is, there were real failures in this industry, but a lot of it is bad press, that there are fundable, good projects. I know of several that are seeking funds right now with an entirely different budget and business plan than these stories that you've heard even today, and even some of my past experiences. We're fundamentally approaching this in a different way, and there are good projects. And if you're involved looking for farms to fund, please, let's talk.
Excellent. Awesome. Really good resource there. Ian, your turn.
Yeah, I'll echo the same. LinkedIn, thank you for having us. These conversations are really important to have. One of the first things we covered was referring to these as shutterings rather than failures, because yeah, we learned an insane amount of things together. And it's a real shame to see other organizations have to go through the same learnings and failures. Just the other day, I was talking with an active vertical farm, or someone involved in an active vertical farm, trying to figure out shelf life, and they are doing the same problems and problem solving that we were doing. And it's a shame that so much money is being plowed into that. And hopefully those kind of sunk costs can be circumnavigated by more of these conversations. So thank you for hosting, Henry and Agritecture.
Yeah, thank you to all of you for being open. Thank you to all of our attendees. Really appreciate your time today. And if I had a plug, it would say subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already. Check out our blog. And if you really are planning a farm, give a chance to Agritecture Designer, the world's first farm planning software, where you can get the yield, capex, opex, water, energy of any vertical farm or greenhouse in its typical form. This will help you understand the realities of the business before you waste any money on buying technology or wasting the time of consultants, et cetera, and your money. So get your research done, get some accurate data. It's a 7-day free trial, so you really can learn a lot for free at the beginning, and it's part of our contribution to the industry, so give it a try. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care. Thanks for another Agritecture webinar. Have a great day.